Everyone has a bucket list. You, me, everyone. Whether you're a 14-year-old just dreaming of all the cars you'll drive in the future, or an ancient fossil like me reminiscing about all the cars you've already driven, you have a bucket list. I've been lucky to scratch most of my itches. Ford's GT40? Hell, that I drove so long ago I'd almost forgotten about it. Mercedes AMG Hammer? Been there, done that. But still I've got an itch left to scratch. The car I've always wanted to drive, the number one car on my bucket list, is this car right here. It's a 1971 Ferrari 246 GT Dino. And it is the most beautiful car in the whole darn world. So does form follow function? Let's get behind the steering wheel and find out. The first thing you notice about Rob Calisi's 1971 Ferrari Dino 246 GT is how meticulously restored it is. It's quite incredible. I've never seen anything so meticulously and well restored as this. It's quite incredible. The windows are all new, but they've all been etched with the original etchings for safety requirements that would have been done back in 1971. There's a sticker on this cigarette lighter which proves that taxes have been paid on the product. Now, get this. The cigarette lighter, you don't push it down like every cigarette lighter of the area. What you actually do is you lift it up and then you put the cigarette into the middle of it and it lights down there, and then you pick it up and you smoke it. I mean, it doesn't work very well and it's notoriously unreliable, but it's so nifty. I've never seen anything like it in my life. The second thing I notice about this car is how roomy it is, considering how small it is outside. It's only 4,300 and a little bit millimeters long from bumper to bumper. The roof doesn't come up to my belt buckle, and yet it's really quite airy. There's lots of room for my feet. I've got lots of headroom. There's lots of room here. There's no tunnel, of course, because it's a mid-engine, so that it's roomy up here. The other thing is that it's very much a GT car. The suspension, again, this is about the comfort inside. The suspension is quite soft and compliant, much more compliant, for instance, than the Lamborghini Jalpa I drove earlier this year. Another thing is again, compared to the Jalpa, the stick shift is much less clunky. It's a lot less clunkier. It's just incredible for the era how smooth this really is. Literally no forcing of gear, no reluctance to go into gear. The only thing I'll say is it doesn't have a gate protector on the for the reverse gear. If you remember from our video, the Jalpa did, which means, yeah, you can go from first to reverse if you don't remember that you gotta move over to go to second. So that would probably be handy if it had that. The oddest thing about the Dino's interior is also the oddest thing about its handling. The steering wheel is in an odd position. I'd like to say it feels like it's typically Italian, which means you got your arms way straight out, but actually it's worse than that. It's actually tilted way up, so it actually feels like a tractor. The owner says that there are spacers that you can get that will extend the steering column closer to you, but then that just puts them higher and your wrists at an odder angle. And it does affect a little bit the steering of your car. I'm sure long-time owners like Rob get used to it, but it is odd. And so it's hard to judge what the handling is like. What I can say is the suspension is softer, so there's more roll than a comparable, say, Lamborghini or even a higher-end Ferrari of the era. That said, it only weighs 1,080 kilograms. So once it's going, the steering is incredibly light. It's very precise. It's a rack and pinion steering, and the roll you don't notice so much. Would I want to go on a racetrack in this car? I think there might be better cars even of the era for that. Would I like to hustle this car down a really fast, twisty road? You bet your sweet bippy. And of course, again, back to the Rob's restoration. The gauges are perfect. He took the gauges apart. He took the freaking gauges apart so he could hand paint the needles. Okay? It's unbelievable. There's 7,000 hours of restoration that Rob and his brother put into this car, and everywhere you turn, be it the interior, the exterior, the engine compartment, it's really obvious how deeply they cared about making this right. And here's the great thing, it's absolutely meticulous, but it's got 15,000 miles on it since the restoration, and it's still absolutely pristine. I couldn't find a paint chip. There's the wheels look like they're brand new. It really is quite incredible how well restored this Ferrari Dino is. And yet, they've only shown the car, I think, but one time at one auto show. And as Rob says, going from a 95-point restoration to a 100-point is double the money and triple the time. That speaks to a devotion to detail beyond the normal. And again, it's incredibly impressive.
First of all, it's incredibly beautiful. And when I was a little kid, I remember seeing photos of it. My brother and I saw it. And because it was the cheap Ferrari, if you will, it seemed attainable to us. And it always felt attainable up until the time we were able to get it. So the Dino engine originated with Ferrari wanting to go Formula 2 racing. And they didn't have enough production of vehicles to make the number of engines that were required to homologate it to go racing. So in a partnership with Fiat, they went and they produced this engine. And the engine was originally used in two different road Fiats. A coupe that was designed by Bertone, and a convertible designed by Pininfarina. And interestingly, those cars and all the development work for the engine was done longitudinally. And in this particular car, when they decided to make the Ferrari variant, they turned the engine sideways. But the carburetors were never designed to go sideways. So if you take a sweeping left-hand turn with this car, it actually will stumble a little bit. No, there isn't logic to who you fall in love with sometimes. But obviously this car is incredibly beautiful, and it's just captured my imagination when I was very, very young. I think interestingly, I would look at photos of it together with my brother, and we saw it as being attainable. Maybe the Daytona looked too far away.
Yeah.
So this car always seemed attainable to us.
You know what's funny? I think this is the most beautiful car ever made. But also the bit you mentioned about attainable is also something. I always thought that maybe I could afford this. You know, I couldn't certainly anymore. But at one point in time, I might have been able to, and it makes the dream more realistic. What's your favorite part of the car?
To look at it. That's the main thing. It's just stunningly beautiful to look at. Also, when you sit in the car and you look out the way that you are right now, the gauge cluster and the top of the fenders reminds me of driving down the Mulsanne Le Mans in a 70s race car. I mean, you really get the feeling of a race car from the period. I've been lucky to have a whole bunch of neat cars, and you know that the special ones are the ones that you take a second look back at them once you park. It was a running, driving car, but the plan was to restore it progressively, one winter at a time, do one job at a time. Unfortunately, that job went off the rails about the first 30 minutes of disassembly, where we tore the car completely apart, and my dad, my brother, and I underwent a 3.5-year, 7,000-hour restoration. which got it to the condition that it is now. So the work was carried out primarily by my dad, my brother, and myself. We did outsource some of the things that we couldn't do in-house, like the paint and body and the leather work on the car, but otherwise everything else we did it ourselves. And it was a process, about 3.5 years, 7,000 hours of work. And one of the things that we learned along the way is that when you're doing a car restoration, the last 5%, doubles your bill and triples your timeline. So it's that last little 5% makes everything else next to it not look as good as it could be. So you just have to elevate everything up when you're really trying to get it as perfect as possible. So when you're looking for the last 5%, it's all kinds of tiny little details. Things like the tags on the seat belts, the etchings that are on the glass, little markings, decals, those types of things really add up over the course of an entire car. And we got into it pretty deep. I mean, a lot of people ask me, how far did we take the restoration? And the answer I always tell everybody is that, we took the clock apart. It was not humanly possible to take the car any further apart than we did. And it was a journey of discovery. It was cool. I can look at any part on the car and think of the journey and the story of what was involved in getting it to where it was. And among some of the things that we did is we had glass specially made in Finland for the car, leather tanned in the Netherlands. The wheels were over 100 different spray outs to get the shade of silver absolutely correct. And you just multiply that over all the parts in the car, and that's how you get to your 7,000 hours. Well, a lot of people think that having put so much work into the car, you never drive it, you never put mileage on it, but the car has probably 15,000 plus kilometers since the restoration was done. When we did the restoration, my dad, my brother, and I wanted to do the best job we possibly could, and we did show the car one time. We showed it at the Ferrari Club of America National Meet, and it's the toughest judging, and we want to see how we would do. And as it turned out, we managed to be the first Dino to ever score a perfect score of 100 points. And while everybody else was loading up their show cars onto trailers, we loaded up the trunk with luggage and drove it down the coast in California. So after that show, we kind of retired it from car shows and decided to put as much mileage as we possibly can on it. With the car done, restored, a lot of times people ask what's the future of the car. And for us really, we're going to drive it, enjoy it, share it with other people, take it to the odd car show here and there. But really it's to just experience it and as they say, get it out of your system for a while. Now we've had the car for over 10 years. We still love it a lot, but one day the time will come and we'll do something else.
This is the heart of the beast. It's a 2.4 liter, 65-degree V6. The original in the 206 was a 2-liter version, and it reportedly had 160 horsepower. The 2.4 liter in European trim has 192 horsepower. Supposedly the American version got 10 or 15 horsepower less. Thankfully for Rob, this car is a European spec car with those full 192 horsepower. The only difference is it's got some British gauges, so it could be in miles per hour, which we used at that time. It's a full double overhead cam system. That said, it's only got 2 valves per cylinder. 4 valves per cylinder came much later for Ferrari. Dual choke Webers, 40 millimeters, 3 of them, one throat per each cylinder. It's why the car sounds so delightful. Between the exhaust and the boom of the 6 individual throats of the Webers, it's incredible, the noise. We heard it inside, you've heard it in this video, but it's truly remarkable when you're in the cabin, revving it all the way up to 7,300 RPM. Thanks, Rob, for letting me do that. It was really nice. The other thing is the transmission is extremely sophisticated. Very light shifting, only 5 speeds, but that was the number of the day. Other than that, it's also quite robust. The clutch is, I wouldn't say delicate, but it's not as firm as some of the more tractor-like transmissions I've tried from the era, and yet pulling up from an uphill, the worst thing you can do on a fragile exotic car, is not a problem at all. No hill control needed, in fact. So the truly impressive thing about this is how sophisticated the engine feels, considering it's now, what, 53, 54 years old. It's quite incredible that it can feel quite as modern as it does. That said, with only 192 horsepower, it's not as fast as a modern supercar, to say the least. Sure, it only has to motivate about, I think it's 1,080 kilograms. That's less than 2,400 pounds. But even Ferrari of the day, which was often optimistic, would say that this thing's good for a 7-second 0 to 60 miles per hour. In actual fact, it's probably closer to 8. But it doesn't matter, because again, it's the quality of the experience, not necessarily the rapidity. And I'll tell you again, one more time, and I know I'm repeating myself, but lordy, is it fun to gas this thing up till it hits the red line. It's absolutely wonderful. It's astounding. I want one. I want it to come home with me. Like most Ferraris, the most glorious thing about the 246 Dino is the motor. It's right behind your ears. It's a high revving V6. No, it's not a V12, but it sounds magnificent. It truly does. I mean, every time you hit the gas, it's an experience. It's an event and it's an adventure. It's really quite something. It's why you want an antique Ferrari. For Driving.ca, I'm a very happy David Booth.